Welcome back to RGR Craft. I'm your host, Ryan, and I have some great news. It's been a really, really hectic time since GABF for me and some international travel, as well as a bunch of other things, changing what we're going to do on this podcast. I'm really excited about where we're going. And while today we're going to get into the holiday feel for this will be released Thanksgiving week, and that's a great time to talk about pairing beers with what you're doing in specific occasions. We're going to get into that. But before we do, I want to let you know that there are changes going on, and it's going to kind of shift focus a little bit. I heard a lot of feedback from a lot of YouTube fans, from a lot of fans across the internet, on Facebook groups, everywhere, really. And the beginner beer brewing guy is already listening. So we're going to try to shift our focus a little bit towards some more of the homebrew advanced type subjects about how to get things done, how to do what you want to do, how to get your version of a beer not only into Beersmith, but also into your kegs. And that's going to be an interesting conversation, as well as the fact that we're going to venture into more of what's going on in craft beer around the nation, around the world, in fact, because it's all starting to affect each other. The economy's changing, the beer industry is changing as well, and it's not just all session IPAs and hazy IPAs these days. So I actually enjoy that, and I'm looking forward to getting into more of that as we go through the next few months. And to help me do that, I'm going to have some more recurring guests. I'm going to have some different voices you haven't heard yet. They're going to join me on the show, maybe help me run the show eventually. And that's what we're looking for. So want to know what you're looking forward to. And if you have specific topics that you'd like to hear about, that'd be great. I love hearing that kind of feedback from the folks that are listening and want to get something out of this. Now, that said, this topic today is all about what's going on right now, this time of year. And it's very, very important because it's real easy to get sidetracked by wanting new beers. If you heard the interview, the big episode that I did a few weeks ago before GABF with Anchor Steam and their head brewer, a lot of conversation in that particular episode about their Christmas beer, which is one of my all-time favorite holiday beers. It's right up there. In fact, at the end of the show, I'm going to do a top 5 holiday beer season list so that you guys can get some ideas for things that maybe you haven't tried. But that said, a very classic kind of a winter warmer, roasty, malty. That's one of those categories of beer, and those are great. There's some great examples out there, and they make this time of year when it starts to get cold, makes it a little easier to deal with to have some of those, but they're not perfect for every occasion. And in particular, I just had a fight with my wife about this. They're not really that great when you're trying to sit down to a holiday meal. That's the difference. They are great on their own in the evening as almost a dessert, a wrap up kind of the day kind of thing. But when you're trying to pair beer with a holiday meal, it gets very, very tricky, and it gets too easy because of the load of the food that you're eating and the vastness of the meal that's in front of you, to load yourself up with even more heavy flavors, things that slow down the rest of your palate and can honestly dull your palate to some of the food that you're eating. And that might be one thing if you're going somewhere that you're not really interested in eating the food. But if you're either the cook or you're really looking forward to a given meal, that's not something that you want to do. So pairing becomes very, very important. And so what I like to do is go through and take a look at the menu. Now, if I'm the cook, and I usually am the cook, I always do a turkey. Sometimes I'll do a ham depending on who's going to be here for that given holiday. But for Thanksgiving, I keep it pretty strict. Turkey, stuffing, dressing, potatoes, a couple of green vegetables prepared in somehow. Not huge on a lot of the more acidic foods. Don't do a ton of Brussels sprouts. Don't do a ton of cranberries. Even the sweetened cranberries still have a good amount of acid in them, especially when they're treated with orange juice, which a lot of people will do over the top. And that actually has a tendency to kind of break up the meal. And that's what you want to do with the beer as well. The things that I've had the most success with, especially amongst those that aren't craft beer drinkers, is pairing, say, Thanksgiving dinner with something lighter, something that can cut through a little bit better. And I'm not talking about a Truon Sour or Goes or something that's really going to change, again, the way that your palate reacts to your meal, because you want to enjoy that meal. That's part of being with friends and family and enjoying that food together. But you want to help it along in a way that doesn't blunt all of it. So what I like to do is get on the lighter side. Now, everybody has their preferences. There are folks that want to have the white wine because it's a poultry dish for the most part. Those of you that do ham obviously would be something different, but a lot of white wine is drank at Thanksgiving meals in particular. Some Beaujolais, a very fruity wine, not something that I care for very much. I like to pair it with beer. And that's because it has an ability to bring out, especially when you've roasted a bird or smoked a bird, bring out some of those flavors. And I think it pairs better with a beer than it does with the wine myself. Personal preference, but that's the way that I go about it. And so what I've done over the years is a lot of experimentation. And I've come down to either buying years ago or for the last, 5-6 years, I've been brewing specific beers for either the Thanksgiving meal or the Christmas meal, etc. And this is what I found. If you go with a beer that you don't want it to be too light because it won't be able to stand up to that kind of palate bashing that you're going to get from turkey and gravy and mashed potatoes, etc., etc. But you want it to not be overpowering as well. So somewhere in the middle, some folks will try to drink Pilsners to try to lighten it up. And I feel like that flavor just gets washed away. So take a little excursion, go a step farther. If you're someone or your family is a group of people that enjoy Belgian beers, try to get into, say, a lighter triple or a Belgian blonde, something that still has enough of a character that gives you that Belgian feel, a little bit of tang in there without being over the top, and still has something that complements the meal that you're eating. I find that those go over pretty well. I have a tendency to go towards the German side at Thanksgiving, though. And I've experimented. We started with Pilsners from years ago, of some Czechs, some Germans, ended up trying to get away from the lager specifically, even though we got to Hellas's, and I think a Hellas is a good option. I come back to a Kolsch every time, and it seems to sit very well with the bulk of the people that I cook for on these holiday meals. And so over the last few years, I've done some experiments in trying to take what is at heart a very, very simple and a very rigid recipe structure for a Kolsch and try to mess with it and try to make it complement or do something different each year. So I have a running Kolsch that comes out the week of Thanksgiving every year. And my guests, the folks that come here every year, I have people from Hawaii that show up every year. I have people from the East Coast, Chicago, Nebraska, all over the place, as well as the Kansas Cityans, although we rotate. So that doesn't always happen. But everybody has different styles. The thing that everybody seems to be able to agree on the most is Kolsch. Enough of a unique flavor that it contrasts with the heavier flavors, the denser flavors of the meal, but you can still play with it, especially if you're the brewer. Now, if you're not the brewer, there's always classics that you can go for. I particularly like a couple of the American-made knockoffs. There's one from Upslope in Colorado. There's one from Boulevard in Kansas City. There are a number around the country that even Alaska's is a bit unique, but does the same job, Alaska Brewing. And I think that's great. I personally want to make that beer. So what I've done over the years is I've played with adding some Cara Red, a Wireman product that gives it a bit of a ruby tone and just enough of blush and a little bit of a fruit over the top that changes the malt character, that sits just a little bit differently. And I've tried just straight Cara Pils to try and give it a little more body without any additional flavor. This year, I've gone with a touch of Vienna and a touch of Munich malt in this year's version to try and give it a little bit more robust, almost graham crackery background as an underlying flavor to put the Thanksgiving meal on top of it. And I think that I'm really excited. This is the first time I've tried it this way, and I think it's going to work out very well. What I've done with Vienna lagers in the past, and some of the other German styles that have a touch of those flavors in them, people generally seem to gravitate toward them pretty readily. So having that paired with this meal, I think is great, and I'm really excited for it. And this particular one, I came up with a recipe just, again, a variation, kind of like you heard from Anchor, how they base every year's Christmas beer on the year previous. I do the same thing. So I tweaked a little bit here, added a little bit here, and now it's going to be ready, but it did come out a little bit heavier in terms of alcohol content. Usually it's about a 6.2 or a 6.3 ABV beer. This year it kind of rose on me. I had a different mash technique, and which is an episode that I'm going to do here in the future about step mashing, how I go about it and what it can actually do to benefit you for you homebrewers. And I got real efficient with it this time. So that's a plus. That's, generally the golden chase that everybody does to try to get more efficient out of their mash. Well, mine actually worked pretty well. And I got a sizable bump over my expected target. And so that paired with the fact that I threw a really nice yeast at it from Imperial called Dieter that I think just has a great overall flavor to it. And the Dieter was kicking. It was only a couple of weeks old when I got it. So after doing a Vitality starter and getting it perfectly ready, it literally hit top Kreuzen maybe an hour before I pitched it in a brand new beer. And so all the things came together and it really fermented out super, super fast. I think it was done in 4 days, which is a little bit quicker than usually about 6 or 7 for Kolsch's for me in the past, given my altitude and my temperatures up here. And the interesting thing is it got all the way down to 10.05. So it ended up with even though it had a little bit of the darker malt, the medium toasted malt with the Munich in there and the Vienna, it actually came out really, really dry. And so I've only had tastes off of the hydrometer to this point, but I'm really looking forward to it. I think it's something that's it's going to be dry. It's going to have enough flavor to keep up with some of the dishes, and it won't be something that gets in the way. I think it's going to complement this meal really, really well. And the techniques that I use this time are starting to get really, really narrowed down. And apart from adding a couple of folks that are going to be regular voices on the show now, I'm also going to still do some videos. This will stay based on YouTube. We might pipe it out to an actual podcast eventually, but it's going to be back and forth between video because I have a brand new brew stand that I built that really, really helped the process. This was the official first brew day on it. It went really, really well. Tweaked my mash setup a little bit. I will explain that in a whole separate video. We'll go through some equipment that really helps with that, and how that I do a hybrid system myself that isn't a classic 3-tier all grain system and isn't one of the newer single vessel brew in a bag type or automated type systems. Those seem to be the two flavors that are everywhere, and I use a hybrid. I use a 2-vessel system, and I'll have a special show on that as well for those of you that have been wanting more actual home brewing technique and information. That's what we'll get to. So that's where I'm at this point. And then it gets to how you formulate holiday beers going forward. Because after this particular holiday, as things settle down and you're on Amazon and all these online stores and trying not to go out to actual stores, sometimes you need a bigger beer than a Kolsch or a Helles. And that's where those classics come into play. I'm going to go through what my top 5 holiday beers are for actual just sipping, having the beer for itself, not putting it with a meal. Now, before we get started, I do recognize that this is my palate and my personal taste, but I want to give a shout out to those of you that love some of these other beers that didn't quite make my list. I can't do anything with a straight top 5, but here's a couple of honorable mentions for you. First of all, classic hoppier version of a winter beer that I do drink on occasion, but it's just not the one that I reach for in the wee hours of the cold. That's Celebration from Sierra Nevada. Great beer. Just has its place. It's just not in my top 5. Same with Prairie Christmas Bomb. It's an excellent stout, but I can't drink that much of it. I like to enjoy more than one. I like to have 2 beers when I'm going to do that. Something that's big enough to get me through that. And not so big that it puts me to sleep. And quite frankly, maybe it's the season or maybe it's something else, but it happens every time that I drink Prairie Bomb. So respect to those brewers, I think those are great beers, as is Odell's Isolation Ale, which is something that I do feel is really nice during this section. It's just not quite what I consider an actual holiday or a winter warmer beer. It's a little bit more plain Jane, not specific to the season. So it does come out a little bit earlier than the holiday season, but so that's why I do that. So first of my top 5, and if you don't drink Christmas beers, you've never tried them, give these a shot. A lot of these are nationally distributed, internationally distributed, but first and foremost, we'll start with one that it might be a little harder to get if you're not in the Midwest, but if you are, you have to go drink Snow and Tell. That's Boulevard's Winter Warmer, and it's on this list for a specific reason, and that is I am a sucker not only for Scotch beers, this is a wee heavy, but barrel aged. It is something that I do at home as closely as I can approximate when I make my beers. I always do my barley wines on oak, and it is really, really great. I love this beer. Every time I'm home for the holidays, this is the first thing I do. I usually get this on the way from the airport to my brother's house. So if you're in the area and you can get Snow and Tell from Boulevard, make sure that you do. Number 4 is one that I go back and forth, and these next 2 beers sound alike. They taste similar. It's just about how much gravity is left, how sweet it is, versus the residual. And the next one on my list, Deschutes Jubile Ale, is just a little bit on the sweeter side, which is not necessarily what I go for. And that's fine if you do, not a problem. They do a great job with it. It is a medium one. It's got a little bit of spice, but I would like a little bit more. So I end up choosing the next beer over it quite often, even though they're super, super similar. And I would put them together in the same celebration with somebody any night. So check out Deschutes Jubile Ale, and then give a shot, if you can get your hands on it, to Avery's Jubilation, because a little bit drier of a finish for me, a little bit more spice. It seems a little more Christmassy to me. I think that's why I rank it ahead, and I usually do. And I kind of go through these top 5 every year as we get closer and closer to the Christmas holiday. And that's the order that I go in. I like Avery's. If you happen to be in Colorado, definitely go get it at the brewery. It is night and day difference from bottling to having it fresh. I have done that several times, and it never fails to astound me just how different it is in the kegs at the brewery than after it's been bottled and maybe a number of weeks, maybe even a little bit more before you get your hands on it. So if you can, give that a shot. And then one that we've spoken about, and we spoke about last time because it's just so iconic here on the West Coast, in the western half of America, and that is Christmas beer from Anchor Brewing, one that I have magnums going back into the early 2000s. That's how well this stuff ages. And every now and then we crack one open. I had a friend open up a 2009, I want to say, 2009 Magnum of Christmas. And it tasted just exquisite. Not only did it build on what it had been, but it ages really well, and you get just this cleansingness that makes all the sugar continue. I think I want to say that there's enough in it that it still continues to ferment just a little bit as it ages. It gets a little bit drier, and I really enjoy that beer, especially after a few years in the cellar. You can get that. It's out now. In fact, I'm drinking one as we speak, so I hope that you guys enjoy that. And then my number 1, and this is where we get to the international distribution, because it's been my favorite pretty much since I started drinking winter beers in college. And it's just so unique that I have to say thank you to Brad and my other friends in the UK that have considered and confirmed for me that this is one of their favorites as well. And it's a little bit different, a lot more fruit to it than, at least on my palate, than some of these other beers, specifically Christmas. But Samuel Smith's Winter Welcome is my favorite Christmas time, holiday time beer. It's brewed in England, and that Samuel Smith does a lot of great beer, but this one in particular is the one that keeps me coming back to that brand. Even though the delay time to get it over here in the States is so long, it's a great beer. And if you haven't had that yet, I know that you can get that across the country, and I think that you should go out and give that a shot. One of my favorites year in and year out. So Let me know what beers you like to drink during the holiday season. I'd love to get some feedback and maybe try a few new things for myself. You can always leave them down here in the comments, and I really welcome that. I'm looking forward to sharing with you. I've got shows coming up on what I did at GABF, some of the great beers that I drank there, how to get around GABF if you're considering making that trip. The new brew stand video. We're going to do a mashing video. I have my new guests. We're going to do a talk on an all-in-one system that a friend of mine just got, and we're going to walk through his initial brew day. If you're a Grainfather fan or you're considering looking at one of those, keep that tuned. So I appreciate all of your time. Thanks for checking this one out. We'll be back in roughly a week. We're going to try to get one out here for the end of the year on a better schedule now that we've gotten past all the craziness, and I'm really looking forward to it. So enjoy your holiday. We'll talk to you next week, and let's have a beer.